Welcome to part 2 of our cemetery build. This week, we're going to be tackling the headstones for our grave plots. To create our headstones, we're going to be looking at two approaches. In the first approach, we'll look at creating our headstones using 3D printing. And in our second approach, we're going to be crafting them by hand using foam. Starting with 3D printing, we go to a site like thingiverse.com, search for our files using key terms like tombstones or graves, downloading the files, and then loading them into our software. The software I'm using here is called Chit2Box. I'll link the files that I ended up using down below in the show notes. It's really just a matter of adding supports and spacing them on the build plate correctly. Add some resin to your resin tank. Attach your printing plate to the top of your printer, and then just press print and sit back and wait for a little while. This really is some pretty cool technology. I just love watching this process. So let's put the cover on the printer, move on over to the crafting station off to the side here. Moving over to the Proxxon, I start by cutting out 1 inch by 1 inch squares, about 1/4 inch deep, which will be the basis for my tombstones. Now to make tombstones, I sometimes start out with just scribbling some unintelligible thing on the front of it using squiggly lines. Or in the case of this first tombstone we're going to make, I end up creating a relief. A relief is just a part of the stone that's raised up that depicts something like a person's face or an important object like a goblet or a sword. Here I decided to go with a sword. I draw the sword on a medium weight chipboard and then cut it out using an X-Acto knife. With my relief cut out, I'm going to move back over to the tombstone and give it some texture using my aluminum foil trick. I get a little heavy-handed when I use the glue to put the relief onto the tombstone. Pretty easy thing to fix. I just go back over it with a paper towel and take the excess glue off. And there we have our tombstone. It's ready for the next step. I glue it onto my grave plot like I did in the last video, and then I get my X-Acto knife out and go to chipping out some sections of it. This helps give it an aged look. And here I cover pretty much the entire surface, including the chipboard that I'm using for the grave plot like I did in the last video. Then I go on and give it a base coat in dark gray. And then I follow up with a semi-heavy dry brush of light gray. With my painting and dry brushing behind me, I do a little bit of edge highlighting as a final touch in a bright white. And then applying the techniques we learned last week, I have a grave plot ready to go. Now let's look at all the different types of tombstones you can create using this same method, and you can do it pretty quickly. Using the aluminum foil and a utility knife in this case, because my X-Acto knife has dual blades, you can take chips out of it and use the aluminum foil to add texture to your tombstone. Using a ballpoint pen or a pencil, you can create impressions of words or runes to your tombstones. And then using PVA glue, you can glue your headstone onto your base. Now for my bases, I'll usually use a little bit of foam setting on top of medium weight chipboard. I think it helps give it a little bit more stability, making it a bit more durable. Now when I'm making my headstones, I'll oftentimes cut out different shapes. Sometimes a rounded tombstone or a cross or something like that. Here I'm doing a rounded headstone. For this particular tombstone, I'm going to be making a cross. I use a pencil to give me the shape of the cross on the tombstone, use an X-Acto knife to cut it out, and then shape it a little bit more by cutting off the edges, giving it a more rounded look. And then we have our cross. Now I'm going to create a base, and I basically do 2 different layers. Give it a little bit more depth. I prefer to use the glue gun over the PVA glue because it's an immediate result. You don't have to wait for the glue to dry. Here's another tombstone, and with it I use the relief with a little bit of medium weight chipboard to give it a plaque. It doesn't take long to create a lot of different styles of tombstones. And you can see here all the different styles of graves that I ended up doing. After I get them all cut out and done, I go back to my typical process of covering them in Mod Podge first. Then I go on and give it a base coat in dark gray. And now for a little bit of the dry brushing. Here I'm using techniques we learned last week to finish out this specific handcrafted cross grave plot. Now I'm going to let that dry for a little bit and move back over to my 3D printer. The print job should be done by now. Let's check it out. You can see on this particular build plate I have a couple of failures in the print. It's probably because I'm using some aged resin and then I set them out into the sunlight to cure. This 3D printing allows you to get a lot of different styles of tombstones really quickly. Let's take a look at a couple of the ones that I have here from several different download files. After your 3D prints have cured, it's time to prime them. So I'm using a gray primer, and as you can see here, as I go along, I'm getting more and more of this on my hands. Not really sure if that's good for your hands or not. I probably should read the label. Now that my 3D prints and my hands are primed, we're ready to get on to the next step and paint these babies. I'm running out of time, so I just do a quick paint job of a Stonewall gray, and I'll come back and touch these up a little bit later. And here you have it, some handcrafted and some 3D printed headstones for your graveyard. Easy peasy. And that concludes another episode of Tabletop That. Feel free to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't, feel free to hit that thumbs down button. Leave comments below and hit that subscribe button if you're so inclined. And until next time, have fun and keep crafting.